Welcome to the video on climate change and urban transport. In this video, I want to make clear that technological change is by far the most important way to go to reach stringent climate goals, but non-technological measures also can contribute and have many other benefits. Before I discuss different options to reduce CO2 emissions of transport, I give some background information. Transport is one of the largest CO2 emitting sectors, and its share is increasing. CO2 is the most important greenhouse gas. In addition, transport, more than any other sector like industry, agriculture or households, is highly oil dependent. Almost all transport vehicles use fossil fuels. Secondly, it is important to realize transport not only includes urban transport, but also interurban, national and international travel. And it includes both passengers and goods transport. Thirdly, this video is on urban areas, and urban transport is mainly urban road transport. What then is the main challenge? People want to be mobile, and companies want to be able to transport goods. In other words, the transport system needs to make destinations accessible. But high levels of mobility endanger the climate. So the main challenge is to maintain or improve accessibility and nevertheless reduce CO2 emissions. How can we meet this challenge? If we want to strongly reduce the CO2 emissions of transport, technologies will be way more important than mobility changes. It is an illusion to think we can reduce these emissions strongly via behavioral change, at least not without much opposition. Non-technological measures will not be sufficient to reduce CO2 emissions of transport globally by more than 10 to 20%, probably less. If we look at technological solutions, it is important to know that transport is generally considered to be an expensive sector to reduce CO2 emissions. It is generally easier and cheaper to reduce these emissions from stationary sources like industry or houses, and in the past, relative emission reductions in such sectors have exceeded those in the transport sector. But something is possible. So what are some of the promising technologies today? I will limit myself to urban transport only. Several alternatives for the current fossil fuels-based road transport system exist, but electric vehicles and in the longer future maybe hydrogen vehicles seem the most promising. And for rail transport, a solution could be to produce electricity sustainably via, for example, solar or wind energy. Electric vehicles are more efficient than hydrogen vehicles, but have smaller ranges and need charging times that are way longer than the time needed to refuel a vehicle. If we solve the barriers of range or charging time, and especially if electric vehicles become cheaper, they have huge potential, especially if we produce electricity in a clean way. If not, hydrogen cars might become more important in the future. How about non-technological solutions? Are they not relevant? I guess they can be relevant. Building in high densities, mixing use categories like houses, shops, schools and medical services, building new offices and houses near stations, and planning for walking, cycling and public transport not only improve livability of cities and accessibility by slow modes and public transport, but also reduce CO2 emissions. a lot of people are optimistic about other non-technological measures like car sharing, carpooling and free public transport. And yes, especially car sharing and carpooling can reduce CO2 emissions. But the research shows that the contribution of those measures is quite small, so do not expect too much. And free public transport? Such a policy can even increase CO2 emissions. This because not only will some people change from the car to public transport, but people will travel by public transport more frequently and further. The extra CO2 emissions of additional trains, trams and buses needed can easily exceed the reduction of CO2 emissions of cars. In 1997, the Belgian city of Hasselt was one of the pioneering cities to provide free buses. Between 1996 and 2004, bus use exploded by a factor 13, but only 16% of the new passengers were former car users. This does not mean that mode choice is not relevant. Cars emit more CO2 per passenger kilometer than public transport, and certainly than walking and cycling. So the choices you and I make in terms of modes we use have impacts. Therefore, land use and transport planning that supports traveling over shorter distances and using public transport or walk or cycle may contribute to CO2 emission reduction. Although I focus on urban travel, it is important to realize that flying is extremely CO2 intensive. One intercontinental return trip by plane is as bad for the climate as the use of a small car in a whole year. If people would fly less for holidays, or if business would substitute travel by information and communication based technologies, such as e-meetings or e-conferences, that would help a lot. If we would continuously implement the best technologies available, we can reduce CO2 emissions of urban transport by more than 50% in 2050. If we would also implement planning solutions, over 60% is possible. But the problem is the change, not the outcome. The pain is in the change. Stringent climate policies generally face a lot of opposition if technologies are more expensive than current alternatives, and if people and companies need to change behavior. But I think after implementation, most people support such policies.